You know, it's kind of funny to think that at some point these Model A mechanics logs were just intended to be some short and temporary thing to show what little things were needed until the car was finally done and I could just drive it and do an oil change and lube job every now and then. But it just so happens that every time I drive it there's something I need to fix. So yeah, join me in this Model A mechanics log. There is plenty to talk about what needed to be done on the car to get it roadworthy again. And there is plenty of things I have planned for the future that I can talk to you about. Here we go! The first topic I want to address are the tires. Last episode I showed you recutting the tread on my tires, which brought me through the next downpours very efficiently, and I'm actually glad that I did that because aquaplaning is not fun in a car with no traction control or anything. However, it's of course not legal to recut your tread in Germany, and just so I didn't land in jail, I then put on fresh new cheap tires to make everybody happy. It's always nice to take a look in the manual and see, oh, you just do this and then lever over there and pay attention to do this and it's all going to be a walk in the park. Well, yes, actually no, because what I found happens after even a few years just is that the tire actually sort of vulcanizes to the steel rim, and in order to get it off the rim you first have to separate that bond. And I found it rather helpful to use two long pieces of wood and then clamp them both together to compress the tire inward. That ought to loosen up one side of the bond, and then you'll have to get creative to get the other side loose. I punched my head a couple of times slipping off with the tire iron. I found out that it is useful to have the hook end of the tire iron in both cases, both putting the fresh tire off and putting the new tire on. Just flip it 180 degrees, and in the one case it's going to hook in onto the tire and make it possible to lever it over the rim. And if you turn it the other way around, it's going to hook into the rim and makes it possible to slide the new tire back on. Now, I've taken my jolly time to do this right, because I didn't want the tire wobbling all about, and I deflated and inflated it a couple of times to make sure it seated itself properly in the rim. Still, however, after having fitted all that, I decided it would be a great idea to see if the wheels are still balanced. Okay, so I've taken the brake adjust tool, aka wrench, and backed out the brake pads, so this wheel is now spinning completely free. And now with the tire mounted and making sure to eliminate all stones out of the profile, the wheel is now going to tell us where it is heaviest. This is not a high precision procedure, of course, but you know, it's going to get the job done for the speeds that this is going to rotate at. And it seems like the heavy point is just about here. Now I'm going to take myself a pack of wheel weights and stick them onto there. For shits and giggles, I also throw the rear wheels on. This one happens to have its heavy spot right where the counterweight is, so we're going to remove that. Let me say one thing though. The best balancing is worthless if your tire isn't spinning true. Now this one isn't so bad, but if you take a close look at it, it's actually dancing up and down. And you cannot get that out with wheel weights, because the entire car is going to do this if the tire isn't round. And sadly, there isn't really a good way to, counteract that. I've read that back in the days sometimes people would go ahead with grinding stones, spin the wheel against the grinding stone after mounting it, and spin it true that way. But, with tires as thin as they are these days, probably not advisable anymore. And, nothing really you can do about that other than truing your rim, which is a whole different topic. The next thing that happened on my agenda was a trip with another couple of Model A drivers. We went through downpour after downpour, of course, but what I wanted to show you here is that it did actually improve the wobbling that I felt in the steering wheel before balancing and after balancing. You'll either be able to see it or you'll hear it in my voice, but when going over this type of land with even speed around 30 miles an hour, then the car does kind of an up and down with the wheels. That's not imbalance, that's just the wheels being out of round. There's really nothing you can do. At higher speeds, on the other hand, I would have usually been able to feel the steering wheel do this, and that is now completely gone. And that's what was caused by imbalance. Imbalance is more of a high-speed thing, out around more of a low speed, 20-30 miles an hour. During that tour, which by the way doesn't a Model A look absolutely gangster when driving in the rain, I think my horn caught a cough, because when I arrived back home, it sounded like this. So I reckon it was time to take that one off the car and take it apart and see what was wrong with it. Well, there's your problem. This wheel seems to be pressed onto the motor shaft, and the press fit has, given up. But it's not actually pressed onto the shaft, that's good, it's screwed on. However, this brass insert here seems to have just given up on the press fit. I don't have a spare part of these lying around, and since I need the car tomorrow, I'm just going to silver solder this back and hope it spins somewhat true, and if not, order a replacement. While I was in the garage anyways, I decided to address a few other issues. A friend of mine, for example, had notified me that my lights in the rear were actually kind of dim and the left was brighter than the right one, and as soon as I hit the brakes they would just go off completely and then just slowly come back on. So yeah, I fiddled with the contacts a little and then opted for a different solution.
What are you doing?
Crazy?
Easy! Shit!
Well, we're in the cabin of the car now, and now watch what happens when I switch the lights on. There's a little bit on the right, and nearly nothing at the left. Now watch what happens when I step on the brake. Oof. So at first, the bulbs of course conduct more current, so the voltage goes down, everything goes off, and then slowly and dimly the brake lights turn on, and they're not really brighter than the normal lighting. So I know it's only 6 volts, but that's not supposed to be that way. Well, the one on the left is still a little bit darker. And if we put the brake lights on, well, now they're brighter than the normal lights, not a whole lot. Well, at this point I decided to try out and switch the incandescent light bulbs for LED substitutes. They are a little bit brighter, but what's most important is that the switch between standard light and brake light is instantaneous, so everybody knows what I'm planning to do. Now I don't even need to shut the garage door to make these lights visible.
And now for something completely different.
I've also talked to you about the issues I have been having with the car running pretty warm and it consuming excess fuel and it misfiring out of the exhaust and the carburetor a couple of times. I managed to solve that issue just by resetting my timing mark. You see, the manufacturer of the insert bearings said that it was not advisable to set the maximum timing advance closer than 28 degrees before top dead center. And I did that and well, had all the issues I talked to you about, and now it slowly came around that that was actually meant for tuning applications like a high compression head or anything like that. With a standard engine you would be perfectly fine setting the timing as is prescribed by Ford, because you won't experience any knocking, you won't experience any pinging, and you won't damage the bearings by doing just so. So I reset my ignition and suddenly the car consumes 1 less liter per 100 kilometers and it is a lot more peppy, and last not least it doesn't run as hot and it doesn't misfire anymore. Could be that simple at times. In my constant rush behind all the rattling noises, I have once again had the opportunity to look at a properly restored Model A and found out that the doors have been equipped with rubbers in points where my car doesn't have any rubbers. Instead, there are just pieces of metal which are loosely clattering about, which is of course one more rattling noise to take care of, and it keeps the door from being properly and tightly seated against the frame and permits it to rattle about. So I bought a new set of rubbers and went on installing those. Another thing that's slowly been giving up the ghost is covers on the foot area. These are just made out of paper, or cardboard rather, and well, I mean, with wet feet rubbing against it and the door rubbing on it on the inside and perpetually being taken off and put back on again. They slowly started degrading up to a point where now they are just plain ugly. I decided against using cardboard again because I don't want to do the same job twice, and bought some 0.5mm PVC sheet, cut it out, put it in. It's now black. Who the hell cares? I must say it looks rather nice like this. It's more of a pick-up-ish optic, of course, because it's black instead of, the color of the interior. I might go ahead in the future and something around that which has that color, but I probably won't because, you're stomping with your feet on it, so it won't stay pretty if you paint it. All the effort I put into making a bracket to hold the indicator switches, and only now did I discover that actually somebody must have drilled a hole in here and mounted a switch before, because how else would you explain all these wonky lines in the sheet metal right here? One more thing that I learned in the meantime is that when you fill your tank to the brim, the petrol is not supposed to slosh all over the gas tank once you take the first right or left turn. You see, the gas tank has a cap on it, and the cap has a vent. And the vent inside is either of good quality or it's a bad repro. And if the gas cap doesn't even properly seat, there is no way to keep the gasoline in. However, if you have a properly sealing but venting cap, there shouldn't be any issues. So I tried to fix mine up. I couldn't do it because it was just a bad reproduction and it wouldn't fit no matter what. I then got my hands on to a much better made one and got that fixed up. And once I had it up and running, I decided to take a second gamble at mine and eventually got that one to seal off as well. Now that my ignition is properly set, temperature isn't an issue with the engine anymore. Much rather the opposite is the case. It's getting cold again. And outside, of course, it's starting to rain and it's starting to freeze and whatnot. So, I'm fitting my leather radiator cover once again. And that, of course, brings up the topic which I started about a year ago, about fitting a radiator cover which is continuously adjustable. And, here is the idea that I came up with this time. Now this sort of gives me an idea. I have taken off the front splash apron in order to drill holes into it, which I can then mount the new shutter onto. Now I hear you drilling holes into 90-year-old iron nuts. Well, hate to break it to you, but this is not an original. This is a replacement, which I can tell by the way that it is. Plus, somebody already has its fun with it because it didn't fit right and had to drill more holes. So I feel zero guilt drilling two more into them, and then I'm going to probably have to bend it up a little bit to make everything fit, because my car is an accident and nothing fits right, and so the shutter would probably get pinched by this recessed piece of material here. I put the splash apron in place, and the cover I made didn't want to thread through, so I loosened the radiator shroud to see why it didn't. And it's now becoming obvious to me that the splash apron sits behind the radiator, so the cover I made would have to thread from the back around, come forward, and then like this. But in order to do that, it also must have space. It has plenty of space right here. But right in here and right in there, the radiator is right up against the splash apron. So, yeah, it bugs me having to say this, but we'll have to do some more to the splash apron to make that work out. Usually I really like modifications that go without drilling holes and cutting everything up, but this time I'm going to make an exception here, because I really want this radiator cover. That's actually the first time I think I got this thing in with all 4 screws without needing excessive force. And it's probably the reason why the radiator got leaking at the point where the splash apron meets it. So I guess sometimes it's good to break with your principle of not modifying parts that are on the car. The ratcheting mechanism on the roller blind is kinda uncooperative still. It's running smoothly in the bearings, that's not the issue. I don't know why the ratchet and pawl aren't really doing what they're supposed to. But that's the rough idea anyways. Scheiße!
Genau.
Next I threaded a piece of stainless rod through the thing with a groove cut on either end, which I can later on put a piece of string or a Bowden cable into, which will allow me to adjust the blind while sitting in the cabin. For now, however, I'm just using it to pinch it in between the radiator and the radiator cover, and we'll figure out an actuating mechanism for the next mechanics log. With all that taken care of, it was time to hit the road once again and have a perfectly working car with no issues whatsoever, until it started raining, and I discovered that it would start raining through the roof once the car sat anywhere for a longer amount of time. Well, it must be the ceiling strip around the front at the top, and I decided to replace that and see how it fares now, because it is raining onto the wood which is in the roof, and that's obviously not going to last long, is it? Now, when I bought the car, the roof had torn right at the front seam. So I told the dealer to fix that before I picked up the car, and he did. He put on a chrome strip along with some foamed rubber, and that worked out alright. Now when I went on removing that foamed rubber, I unearthed quite a bit of old glue which had been put into numerous places and had to be removed before I could attempt at resealing the roof. So I whittled away at it with a pocket knife, being careful not to dig into the vinyl, and then resealed everything with all the craftsmanship might that I had. It's certainly not super pretty, but it ought to seal up at least. The proper job would be to remove this chrome cover here and redo the whole thing, but I just don't have the heart for it. Once this has cured, I'm going to clean up the little cosmetic things here, but it should be leak-proof now, the way it is. Well, that is it for this episode of the Model A Mechanics Log. It is of course not going to be the last one, and it's of course not going to be the last big project on this car. For example, currently I'm working on building up a second gearbox, because mine is starting to slowly degrade. And I've got a little something extra there, so you can prepare for a rather large project video, and that's somewhere this winter I'm planning. I will of course have to build it up, I'll have to swap it out for the one that's currently in it, and I don't want to do that in a time where I need the car, so it's probably best that I wait until they put salt on the roads and I put the car away for good. Anyways, with that, I'll leave you to it. And thank you very much for watching. See you guys next time. Bye.